Time to cancel the Cabal, with Stephen Roberts, on MSI Radio.
truthbroadcastnetwork.com.
truthbroadcastnetwork.com.
This is media streaming international radio. This is media streaming international radio.
Okay.
I bet we have audio now. Okay. I can see your audio on my mixer now, so I think we're okay.
Okay, good. So are we on the air, or is this, are we on a break?
Nope, we're on the air.
Okay. All right.
I'm having technical glitches like nothing. Crazy.
I see. Okay. So should I reiterate what I just said about I guess
sure. Just your background, sure. Absolutely.
My background, yeah. I did my undergraduate at San Jose State University, my graduate work at University of Arizona, and University of Iowa in media studies and mass communication, respectively. And I am a associate professor at Florida Atlantic University. I teach political communication, public opinion, local audit journalism, and the relationship between news and politics and political happenings, social and cultural occurrences and the like. Although I must emphasize that I'm not here representing my employer, and that's something I do point out when I'm doing interviews that relate, I guess, more so to what I do at memoryholeblog.com, which is extracurricular, more or less. There's been some degree of controversy beginning in January because the writings that I did on Sandy Hook and then subsequently Boston got a great deal of exposure and criticism in the national media, even international media. And this is something that put my employer sort of on the spot. And I don't think that they necessarily appreciated that, given the nature of what was being discussed, which I maintain was simply, I was more or less in some ways doing my job. Granted, it was something that was done in some ways on my own time, but it is what I also teach, what I also research, to a certain degree. It's difficult to really separate those things. I think that's the case with a great many scholars. And I'd had the blog since I began in March of 2012, doing a few articles a month or more. I sent a few articles to Global Research, and I was very delighted that Michelle Shazudovsky, whose work I've admired for years, and I've been a global research reader for many years. He appreciated the material and encouraged me to, continue contributing, and I've been doing so ever since. So that in a nutshell is I guess my background, fairly up to date.
Wow. Yeah, very good. I have one quick burning question I've had for 4 years now. I also am in a communications. That's the area of my study. I have an associate's degree in mass communications, and I'm currently taking a hiatus in my BA studies of business communications, which is just the third year of the journalism communications area, because I'm doing two shows. I've been doing two shows for a month now, but I started with one show back at the end of January. So about the end of last year, I decided to take my hiatus and start doing some broadcasting. So that's where I'm coming from.
Well, I think that's that's a good sign. I think I would be appreciative of more of my students actually taking an initiative, or more young people generally taking the initiative as far as putting their feet in the water and putting together a podcast, putting together a blog, what have you. It's important. I think it's important, first of all, actually to have a political perspective that's something apart from what is given to us in mainstream corporate media by the talking heads and what have you. That's the first step, and then actually taking the time to research things, to write about them, or to interview people. These things are very important. It's an education that I don't think can necessarily be replicated in the classroom. It's something that one has to take upon themselves to actually do. Our youth today are really depoliticized in many respects, and you could argue that is something that is it's just occurred, or it's something that is to a certain degree by design, but it's a fact, and that's very unfortunate. I don't think it bodes very well for our future if people are not as cognizant of what is going on as they probably should be.
Absolutely. Well, unfortunately, I am not part of that youth you are speaking of, because I will be 50 next birthday. So
okay, we're about the same age then, more or less.
Yeah.
I'm a few years younger, in fact. Yeah.
Okay, but my burning question is the first burning question. Do you think there are a lot of academia that are let in on some of the conspiracies out there and some of the agenda, as far as the media and the push to world government is going?
Yeah. Well, if they are, they're keeping it an awfully good secret. You don't really hear those types of discussions within the halls of academia. I suppose I'm an exception, and that's one reason that there's been so much notoriety around my remarks concerning the Boston Marathon bombing and Sandy Hook, which I think are rather obvious to anyone who cares to look a little bit beyond the headlines and the sound bites and things like that these things are to at least a certain degree contrived. But unfortunately, there's not enough discussion. There's not enough scholarship and work as there probably should be in, for example, sociology, political science, or communication and media studies, mass communication, dealing with these types of issues. I mean, the most important event of our time is 9/11. And this is something that really touched off the so-called war on terror, and it's something that hardly gets any real serious attention, I'm afraid, in academia, like it actually should. Now there are there are a handful of exceptions, but I think if academics really do want to take a close look at that, an undiluted look at it, if you will, something whereby the disciplinary blinders are sort of taken off, and there's a broader attempt to address the event and its implications and its repercussions and the aftermath. That's something that unfortunately is not taking place, and I think that frankly, I think that there's a fear to actually address something such as 9/11, or the July 7th, 2005 London tubeway bombings, or a variety of other things, and how are intelligence agencies, for example, related to this in both the United States and foreign countries. Our elected leaders, for example, all of these things are rather disturbing, I think, probably even for the scholar. And there are a lot of other topics that one can take up, that one can address, that one will be more encouraged to address in terms of getting tenure and moving up the ranks, and than something like something such as 9/11. And there's also the tremendous fear that scholars have of being called a conspiracy theorist. And that might sound difficult to believe, but that term is, I think, an important sort of disciplinary technique that is used on academics, and I think it's also used on journalists.
Do you think
They
that's
really,
do you think
yeah.
that's a do you think maybe that's a subliminal threat, or a slight insinuation, like don't go down this path, or
Yeah, I
you
do.
might end up like Dr. Stephen Jones and Dr.
Right.
Judy Wood, and
Yeah, yeah. It's something that is subliminal, as you put it. It's something that is subtle. There are a lot of connotations that are attached to it. A lot of negative connotations, right? We had, for example, the Hollywood treatment of this with Mel Gibson back, I believe, in the mid to late 1990s. This kind of nut who's holed up in a small apartment, and
conspiracy theory. Yes.
yeah, exactly. And that's something that has in some ways, I think, framed the notion of what a conspiracy theorist is. The idea that there's something beyond the pale. More importantly, though, they're irrational, right? So there's the whole question of one's judgment that comes into play here, because as a scholar or as a journalist, your rationality and your judgment, as they relate to your reputation, are really your cultural capital. And academics, and I would imagine journalists as well, even though I've not really worked as a professional journalist in a newsroom or anything of the like, but the same holds true for them. In that if they get labeled that, if they mix with the wrong company, if they, appear, for example, on the wrong program, or are quoted by the wrong individuals, media, then that's something that they have to account for. It's been used on me as well. Just back in April, a couple of professors, senior professors from my college, sent a letter to the local newspapers on why the university's conspiracy theorists should resign, right? And I actually took them to task for that on my blog, arguing that it was a very brief letter, but they were saying how, scholars are the ones that actually take ideas and we ruminate on them, and we kind of dissect them, and it's something that is quite different from what conspiracy theorists do, because they just post on blogs and so on and so forth. And I countered by saying, well, but you're violating your own criteria, because what actually is, when we say conspiracy theorist, what do we actually mean by that? We're talking about someone who is questioning the way in which social, political, and economic power work in today's world. And it almost invariably involves a conspiracy, It's more complex than probably a single cabal sitting around a oak table somewhere. But nevertheless, you could look at any charter of any for-profit company and contend that that's a conspiracy there to make a profit, to make money. There's not necessarily anything wrong with that. But again, it's these connotations that our culture, our popular culture, and what have you, attached to this term. And I think that I think also it's something that does unfortunately discourage a lot of potentially very innovative and productive scholarship that might otherwise take place if there was not this sort of fear. There's a lot of, for example, Marxist inspired scholarship that's done within the academy, and no one complains about that, although you could certainly make the argument that Marxists are conspiracy theorists to, to some degree. I certainly could anyway. I mean, a number of my colleagues consider themselves radical Marxists, what have you, and yet they don't consider themselves, they would not think of themselves as being conspiracy theorists, because those two things are not identified with each other in our culture. So you were going to say something?
Well, I just had a little statement I could add. About a month and a half ago, I interviewed Dr. Jonathan Moreno. He's a professor of bioethics and history out of University of Pennsylvania. And I also caught him in an interview, and he also admitted right on my show that he does not entertain conspiracies at all, just because of the ramifications that can come to academia, such as yourself and Dr. Stephen Jones and Dr. Judy Wood, and probably quite a few others that have questioned the establishment.
Sure. Well, then I think that one has to, I think this in part is a personal decision. Now, it's also institutional, because, if someone is on the tenure track and they don't get tenure, then, they're out of a full-time job. And so at the same time, I think that the Academy offers a great many opportunities, and it's a wonderful job in the sense that one is actually able to look at and interrogate things that that they might otherwise, I guess, do in their spare time if they had a regular 9-to-5 job or the equivalent. So a lot of people don't want to rock the boat simply because it's a it's a wonderful it's a wonderful occupation. It's a wonderful profession to get paid to do these types of things, and also not only research, but the pleasure of being able to teach these types of things. So I think that aside from that, one has to look at, inside, what are these sort of personal criteria, the sorts of things that one looks to in terms of assessing themselves and what they believe to be important in today's world, and the extent to which they can actually address them within the confines of their profession. Now, I was just thinking about this this evening. I have 3 young children, daughters, 7, 4, and 2 years old. And, about a year or so ago, my oldest daughter and I were up here in the office at the university, and down the hall from where I'm sitting now, there's a photo of the aftermath of 9/11, and I don't know if you've ever seen this or not, but it's taken in downtown Manhattan, and it's probably taken that late that morning of September 11th, 2001, or in the early afternoon. But there's a man there who is covered in the dust, and he's sitting on a bench, and he has his laptop open. Apparently, he's trying to get a signal, trying to get online or see if it still works. But he's covered in this powder. He almost looks like a statue. And my daughter said, "Daddy, what is that? What happened to that man?" And that's a complex. It's a very complex question. How do you respond to that in a truthful sort of way? How would I respond to that, for example, if one of my students was asking me that? But this is my own child. This is something that everyone really has to reconcile with themselves. You say that a man in pajamas in a cave halfway around the world attacked us, and some buildings fell down, and that man was caught in the aftermath. I mean, these sorts of things are conundrums that we have to, I think, examine in our own personal lives to a certain degree, and be honest, not only to ourselves but to our loved ones. And I think that if we do that, then that is something that emanates throughout our broader lives, throughout our professional lives. Again, this is an extremely important event. What actually took place? These are the sorts of questions that we really need to know as a people, as a nation. And are we going to, like some of our institutions, our political leaders, are we going to lie to our subjects, to our children, or what have you? Or are we going to be more honest? Now, granted, a 5 or 6-year-old is not going to understand things like international intrigue or anything either. But maybe they were, if they were 12 or 14. How is one going to actually address that? Are you going to give them the official version of events, or are you going to attempt to explain to them a more nuanced and complex thing that whereby it would actually be more truthful in the long run?
Yes.
And yeah.
Well, I think just one might just actually speculate and go as far as they could with that, as far as an explanation to a child or something. But I guess another question that arises: why? Well, actually, what was the first experience that actually made you question an official narrative from our government or from the media? What might have been the catalytic event that made you first question? Was it Sandy Hook, or was it maybe 9/11, or was it something previous to that?
Well, I think when I was in an undergraduate at university in my late teens, early 20s, I always had questions about the Kennedy assassination, both John and Robert, but primarily President Kennedy. And that's something that really, I think, affected my family. My father in particular was this big sort of, proud to be 100% Irish Catholic sort of person, and so they really identified with the Kennedy dynasty and their being in power, or John Kennedy being in power. So it's something that I think affected the household in a very profound way. I don't think I realized that then. But I certainly, in reflecting on that, I certainly do realize that now. But not just our household. I think the entire nation was traumatized as a result of what took place then. So I always had a fascination, was always curious and questioning as to why, he was killed so early on in his presidency, and how the official story really didn't hold up. And I think that was driven home even more so when I saw the Oliver Stone film that was done in 91, 92, which of course, was based on the work of Jim Mars and Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty and
Yes.
and what have you. Yeah. And who was an advisor, I think, on the in that film. So that's something that I think got the ball rolling to a certain degree. Also, when I was finishing up my undergrad degree at San Jose State University, I did a paper for a class, an African American Studies class, and we had read Martin Luther King, or excuse me, Malcolm X's autobiography. I think I read that on my own, but I did a paper, a final paper on his assassination, and looking at news reports and so forth, and how odd it was that he really did not have the police protection that he should have had. And, that seemed as if it was something that was a setup. And of course, we know now that was likely the case, and that was certainly the case with regard to Martin Luther King Jr. That came out. This was in the early '90s again when I was working on this paper. But in the mid to late '90s, there was the civil trial that concluded that King was killed in part by a plot by the federal government. So these sorts of things have. I think they initially piqued my interest, and they were affirmed in subsequent years.
Okay. I guess the next question is, why did you question the narrative of Sandy Hook? Because that is basically what put you out there in the spotlight for millions and millions of American viewers, and possibly the world too, for that fact.
Yeah. Right. Well, I think that why did I do that? I wasn't the first person to actually question Sandy Hook, but I was the first, I guess, credentialed person who works, who has a some sort of a doctoral
Influence.
what have you, yes, and who has a position at a state institution to question it. And in part that's what I do. At media criticism and so forth. So I didn't really look at the event awfully closely when it was transpiring. I'm not generally glued to the to cable news or the 24-hour news cycle necessarily. It was only in looking at some of the alternative press accounts of this event, and then looking at it more closely thereafter, some of the mainstream accounts and otherwise, that I began to really question what actually had taken place there. And I was on winter break for the holidays, and I wrote a few pieces on it. And one piece that I wrote, it was a collaborative effort in part. An individual from Australia was contacting me through my blog, and raising some questions as well. And I had some at that time. This was around Christmas time. I think I finished this piece on December 24th, and that was the unanswered questions piece. And that's something that was run by Global Research, and then it went viral on Global Research shortly thereafter. And it got quite a bit of play on my blog as well, but not nearly as much so. And one of the things that I looked at there was just the bizarre sort of exchange between the press and H. Wayne Carver, the Connecticut medical examiner. And it looked rather unusual just watching this 15-minute exchange on YouTube. But I actually sat down and transcribed it. And this doctor was so clumsy and so inept in his responses. I remarked, and this is something that was echoed throughout the media, and something I think was used to sort of fan outrage toward me. But I said, this has to be, this individual, in some way, shape, or form, he must be somehow feigning, or this. My exact words, I believe, were, this could not have taken place in a way that the media actually told us it was taking place. And that statement was taken out of context and quoted, ad nauseum, apart from my transcription of Carver's remarks to the press. And again, how poorly it was handled by him. Now, I do have some theories as to why that actually was, why his performance was so bad. But just looking at that at the time, I figured something must be up. This person either has to be, I think that's what I said, he has to be an actor, or, or otherwise he was not even involved in the autopsies that he claimed to have presided over. But there are just so many anomalies. I mean, after looking at this over several months, they just keep emerging. But at the time, I became at least partially convinced that this was something that was done, whether it was, whether people actually died or not. It was something that was done in an effort to promote greater gun control measures, and also measures regarding mental health and hygiene, or what have you. But both of these things combined, and I don't think that anyone will debate the fact that the Obama administration was really dead set on pursuing greater, gun control measures from the federal level. Upon his reelection, he and key Democrats such as Dianne Feinstein, and of course his Attorney General Eric Holder, the fact that they smuggled weapons or allowed weapons to be distributed to Mexican drug cartels and what have you, that resulted in the deaths of thousands of Mexicans as well as some Americans. These were things that the administration, the Obama administration, has not come clean on yet. So it seemed to me rather obvious that this was something that was being done for political reasons, and I was fairly explicit about that in my articles. And that's something else that I think really put me beyond the pale, I guess, of most academics. And that here's this academic, and he must be a right-winger or something, because he's concerned about the Second Amendment. And my stance has always been, well, if the Second Amendment is going to somehow be restricted or revised or what have you, it should not be done based on events that may not have even taken place, or we don't know actually what took place. The overall investigation is not going to be concluded for several months. Back then, they delayed it until like the end of March. And we need to know what's going on before this stuff is sort of railroaded through the Congress or by executive order, what have you. So I felt a sense of urgency at the time to comment, and to comment in quickly, and perhaps maybe a bit too hastily, but to push back, to remark on this in a way that was compelling, provided an argument that hey, something is going on here that we are not being told all that we should be told, and why is that? We need to actually know more. So that really is that was my my primary impetus for attempting to get that information out there. And of course, one piece that I wrote that appeared solely on my blog was about the possibility that this event was a drill, that it did not actually take place. And that's something that, of course, got me, things were quoted from there as well. And at the time, looking at all of the events as they transpired, as they were presented in major media, interviews and so on and so forth, and things that were not there, things that should have been there but were not, such as coverage, footage of an evacuation of several hundred students from a school. There was no aerial footage of that. So there were just a lot of anomalies that that caused me to question whether or not this may have been a fairly elaborate drill that was presented, with the use of perhaps actors, crisis actors, to present this event as real to the public. And that's something that I think that there was a good deal of criticism from the mainstream outlets as well. That really that was probably pushing the envelope too far to suggest that the government would ever do anything like that when they arguably have done these types of things in the past, real or contrived. We have the documents of, for example, Operation Northwoods. We know about that. We know about Operation Gladio, the 1960s through the 1980s. We know about the political assassinations in the 1960s that I mentioned earlier. Well, these things are confirmed. They're not a matter of speculation or conspiracy theory any longer. At the time, arguably, they were to a certain degree, but they no longer are. So it's not beyond reason to suggest that our own government would act like any other government that has a tremendous amount of power at its fingertips in terms of military and intelligence and surveillance and so on and so forth. Those are the sorts of things that I was taken to task for, and unfortunately, I was disappointed to some degree that some of these things were not taken up more so by some of the more salient Patriots, alternative media, as much so as they might have been. The idea that, for example, some of these events were, may have been drills. It seems rather obvious that was the case with regard to Boston, because that's something that appeared, or something that took place right there in broad daylight, and there's the photographic evidence to suggest that that this was likely a drill of some sort. But these things were not taken up and run with by major alternative media, as I would suspect that they would have been. And so in that regard, they're generally in lockstep with the mainstream media in asserting that these were things whereby there were fatalities and what have you.
Yes, very good. Well, I had reason to question Sandy Hook from the beginning. From my studies in the media and government in the last 4+ years, I've learned how the establishment works, the establishment media and the government, as far as a collusion being a hand-in-hand collusion. It just seems that whatever a government official comes out and says, that is what the official word is, whether it's true or not.
That's right. And it's one thing for the layperson to accept these things at face value, but quite another, I think, for individuals who know better. And that includes a lot of journalists, and I think that it includes a lot of, I think at least some academics as well, to more vigorously question these types of things, these types of pronouncements. But that doesn't take place to the extent that it actually should, and there are rewards, no doubt, for staying quiet. You're not threatened with deprivation of your livelihood and employment or anything like that if you keep your head down. So I don't think that's necessarily anything new. I don't think it's necessarily anything endemic to to journalism or academia. I think that's probably the case more broadly, and I think that also points to a theory that is often used to explain away discussion of potential conspiracies or examination of these things. The idea that, well, there would be a whistleblower, someone would come out and speak.
Yes.
This is what we hear from individuals such as Noam Chomsky, right? Who essentially led the left, the progressive left or what have you, in a particular direction away from, really serious examination of 9/11 by arguing that, and that's not the first time he's done that. I mean, he's done that with the Kennedy assassination and whatever. But anyway, his idea, his argument that, well, there would be all sorts of people coming out of the woodwork,
Yes.
with regard to 9/11. Well, would that in fact be the case? Is our government not capable of silencing individuals that might be predisposed to do that? Is our government not capable of bribing people? Is it beyond them to do those sorts of things for those that it has on payroll or has contracted out or otherwise? In fact, it arguably did that with 9/11, with various individuals who were silenced one way or another. There's a whole list of individuals that died mysterious deaths related to the JFK assassination. There are other events that one could point to as well. They call it being suicided. I mean, this is what it's called in the Russian media, for example. They talk about well-known military officers or political leaders, what have you, and they refer to the likelihood that this person was suicided. They make, they
Right.
say that in an unabashed sort of way. So why is it so surprising, for our citizenry, not to suggest to them that these things don't take place, on behalf of they don't take place or are not carried out by our government, because of course they are on a fairly regular basis. And I think that is actually, it has become more blatant in the Bush administration and even more so in the Obama administration. And I think Obama is actually, he in many ways is worse and more dangerous.
Yes.
Because some of those that have a political conscience and critical awareness have generally been demobilized in the face, in the wake of Obama. Well, he's, for one, they're afraid of being called racist if they criticize him. And that's the demobilizing element of it. But also there's just this sort of impulse to give him the benefit of the doubt. Hey, he's all right. It's Obama. He's cool, Whereas if you had a Romney or a Bush in the White House now trying to do half of the things that Obama's doing, I mean, they would be,
They would be howling like banshees.
They would be, yeah. And that's why it's so hypocritical. I think that up until the past few years, I considered myself to be liberal, progressive, left, or what have you, and I've taken a step outside of that, and I guess as a result of the Obama administration, how hypocritical they are, and how hypocritical so much of the left is in cheerleading for war or looking the other way. Yeah, wars.
Multiple
just
wars.
Because,
yes.
Right. Just because it's called humanitarian.
Right.
R2P. It's okay if we call it humanitarian, when in fact people still die, and completely in an unceremonious way as well. And so it seems to be much more hypocritical under Obama.
Yes. I see a lot of social media posts that are really critical of the liberal left. A lot of posts that might say like, where's the where's the stop the war chants now, or
Yeah.
how is this Nobel Peace Prize winning president such a warmonger? And they're they're really simple manipulations, but simple forms of rhetoric. But I think that they can't be ignored because they are so poignant.
Right. Yeah. I agree, and it's difficult to some degree to actually I guess confront or engage in conversation with some acquaintances of mine about politics anymore, because it ultimately comes back to this administration. you know and sometimes they'll say, well, his hands are tied, he can only do so much, and well, that of course is nonsense. It was a disaster from the get-go, from November of 2008, where the blank checks were essentially written to bail out the major transnational corporations and the zombie banks. If a fraction of that were actually used to revive the economy and to rebuild our industrial base, our economy would be on a real mend today, and not on top of another bubble, in my view anyway.
Okay. I don't have any kind of set time for breaks or anything, but would you like about a 3 or 4 minute break?
Yeah, that'd be fine. That'd be good.
Okay. Okay, I will see about putting a song in, and I don't have network promos or anything like that. We just pop a song in. So.
Okay.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in about 4 minutes or so. Okay, we're back. I cut that song a little bit short there. I got back there, and I'm still having some computer technical problems. I'm going to have to get fixed after the show. I wanted to get into the heart of your curriculum. I understand you said that you teach critiquing of the media. Can you explain what that means?
Huh. Yeah. I probably, yeah, in a number of ways. Depends on the particular class, but a good deal of what I do is journalism, news media history, but also criticism, and that in part involves looking at the types of stories that are not covered in mainstream media outlets that a great many, a large percentage of the population are not privy to, and therefore we don't know what is actually going on in our world as a result, about pressing sorts of concerns, things such as genetically modified organisms in our food supply, or the dangers of the fallout from the Fukushima disaster, the precarious state of our economic system. All these sorts of things could be elaborated, could be articulated to the population. They're certainly able to to articulate, to explain. I'm talking about major media are able to articulate and explain the travails of Paula Deen, or any number of for example, the Zimmerman trial. This is sort of water cooler conversation. But these other types of things that actually threaten, government and corporate power, government generally often really being kind of a variant, another element of that, of corporate power being wielded. These sorts of things are really more or less off the agenda. And you could argue that that is nothing new, but it also at the same time has actually gotten worse. If you look at the Boston Marathon event, the Sandy Hook event, now things are actually to some degree, really being contrived and then spun. So we're existing in this unreality. We're, not only is news that is important overlooked, but we have events that are now increasingly being contrived and spun. So one of the things that I do with my class is we are participants in Project Censored, which you may be familiar with. I don't know if you are or not, or whether or not the audience might be.
A little bit.
Yeah, but this is a more or less a group of scholars and journalists and what have you that have their classes delve into alternative news stories that have come out that have generally been swept underneath the rug by major media, and there are usually a couple hundred nominations that universities from across the world now look at and submit proposals that are vetted by faculty members, and then they're voted on by a fairly broad panel of journalists, activists, scholars, and so forth. And there's a list of 25 of the top stories that are then broken up into various what are called clusters now, having to do with, for example, war and violence, the economy, science and technology, and there are a couple of others. But anyway, I've participated in that over the past several years now in one way, shape, or form, and contribute to the annual yearbook that comes out, and that's one exercise that we do that in some ways kind of epitomizes what we discuss and what we examine in the classroom. And in another class, what we do is look at the history of public relations, and so that involves looking at the history of key figures in the public relations industry, if you will. So individuals like Edward Bernays and Ivy Lee, but also individuals that have theorized the significance of public relations, politics, and public opinion. So you have individuals such as Harold Laswell, Walter Lippmann, George Creel. All of these figures really cut their teeth, so to speak, in World War I, where the U.S. government waged really the first major propaganda effort in order to stir the population to support the
war. Yes.
The war, the war to make peace, right? The war to World War I was we're gonna fight a war to create peace for the bankers for which the war was waged by Woodrow Wilson, Wall Street Democrat, and so there's all of this rich and important history that also that's probably not presented in such a way as it is. In this one particular class on public opinion, and how public opinion has in many ways kind of become the plaything of those in power, the tail wagging the dog, where meaning major interests that control our governments in many ways seek to shape public opinion, where of course it should be the other way around, where the popular will actually does have some sort of determination or determining, plays an element, a meaningful element in the forging of public policies. And that has been less and less the case throughout the past several decades. And was it ever perfect? It was never necessarily perfect, but there were periods where you did actually have arguably a more informed public, certainly than we have today.
I don't want to assume anything of you, Professor, so I will just ask. Are you familiar with Charlotte Iserby and her book, Deliberate Dumbing Down of America?
Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah, I've read
Okay.
portions of it. Uh-huh.
I have the book also, and I've started it, but I haven't gotten far into it. But I've seen some interviews of that she has given over the years, and her claim is, um, I believe it was the Rockefellers and other um, corporate entities that
Hmm.
started to finance the Russian taught education system, brought over here by a man that escapes me now. Somebody that maybe you can refresh my history.
The Prussian education system. Yeah.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. The
Uh-huh.
Prussian
Right.
education system, and thus the trivium and the quadrivium was summarily dropped from the American education system, and rhetoric and critical thinking wasn't taught anymore. Thus, people are more open to manipulations and mind control, if you
Yep.
will.
Yes,
I
I
thought
think so.
I thought maybe yeah, I thought maybe you might want to make some comments along that line.
Well, it is an essential element or aspect of this broader discussion. It's very important. I think it's very good that you bring that up because there is, of course, propaganda and manipulation of public opinion, but these things would be far less effective, or they would be rendered ineffective if we actually had a more critical public. And part of this does have to do with the educational system that I think has now, in many ways, embodies what the Rockefellers and the Carnegies envisioned 100 or so years ago when they set out to fund, to bolster what was referred to as experimental psychology, the sort of the pragmatism that was taught and then operationalized in the classroom by the likes of John Dewey and Edward Thorndike and others
Right,
at the experimental school, the lab school at Columbia University. The first lab school was set up by Dewey at Chicago, which, of course, as you likely know, Chicago being primarily bankrolled, University of Chicago being primarily bankrolled by the
the
Rockefeller
Rockefellers, yes,
family. Yep. In fact, that was John D. Rockefeller regarded that as being his greatest philanthropic sleight of hand. I don't think he actually put it in those words, but his greatest philanthropic move was bankrolling the University of Chicago. This is something that paid off for him. And I don't think that that's been lost on subsequent philanthropists, rich individuals that seek to burnish their image through endowments and what have you, and building up educational pursuits that further pave the way for humanity's broad, or rather, strides into the future. These sorts of things are tremendously influential for the segment of the population that they seek to influence. The people that listen to NPR and consider themselves to be upwardly mobile professionals. No, 10, 15% of the population, or Orwell regarded as being the inner party, right? So
yes.
these types of these philanthropic endeavors, foundations, and so forth as well. This is something that I believe Iserby talks about in her work to some degree, that these were things that foundations and non-governmental organizations in important ways constitute an invisible, overarching government, a tremendous influence, and it's something that does harken back to a certain degree to what we were discussing in the first hour, and that is, why is it that those in higher education are so fearful of actually talking about things that might involve conspiracies within their own country and their own government? I think that there's definitely a link. One could argue that point where you had the underwriting by these powerful interests and foundations of the major professional organizations that created the disciplines in the social sciences, including history, psychology, sociology, economics. All of these, the founding of these disciplines in the United States involved and grew out of the creation of these organizations themselves, right? So these organizations were heavily influenced, either overtly or covertly, monetarily, or through influential figures that created the development of the disciplines and their objects of study, what they would actually look at, what they would consider. And so yes, and that's, we're talking about higher ed. But to get back to your point about elementary education, certainly I think that it's fairly safe to say that for a portion of the 20th century, early 20th century anyway, a college education was less necessary because the trivium and quadrivium were actually still emphasized at the grade school level and at the high school level. So a very small percentage of the population actually did go on to university, and even smaller percentage went on to graduate school and what have you. Now it's almost a given that young people, at least that's something I think in a way that higher education is sort of peddled, is that you have to have a degree and you have to, in some cases, you do. But I think in part it speaks to the failure of the K through 12 experience, and the way in which, certainly in public education, unless one has the resources to send their child to a prep school, and even there, the curricula there resemble public curricula in some cases. Only a handful of the very important, the very significant, prep schools reserved for the very wealthiest families and influentials in this country that do still practice the old sort of education that gives one the critical skills, because these are the individuals that are going to manage the society, that are going to oversee the political and social institutions and what have you. So it's important that they actually are able to think critically, and that's not a priority in the public school system. So yeah, this grew out of the experimental psychology. It grew out of the Prussian education system, an attempt to actually create a willing and docile soldier that would not ask questions or anything of the like. I'm docile mentally, right, malleable, and would not ask questions before going into battle. Like, why should I be doing this? It's just simply a matter of going ahead.
Or why am I doing this? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so all of these things really do reverberate in the stimulus response sort of the pursuits of like Skinner and what have you. But these things are used, they are implemented in the classroom. The classroom becomes a laboratory, through the years. And this doesn't happen overnight, obviously, but it does over time actually take hold. And to again, where today, really things like important things like philosophy and theology and what have you, those things are really not not even discussed or touched upon. But more importantly, the method to be able to tackle subjects like that are really not touched or anything of the like. And it's an entire industry now that is part of our, it's part of our public institutions, public education. It's something that is reinforced through schools, colleges of education. And so there's a whole bureaucracy and what have you that is built around our very limited educational enterprises in this country. And I think that probably in a nutshell, if one had to summarize it, and for the purposes of our conversation, what this does, what the schooling system does, is that it conditions, it does not instruct so much as it actually conditions an obeisance to authority figures. And so this is especially important for our broader discussion tonight, because why is there no questioning of things like the Sandy Hook narrative or Boston or a variety of other things that are less well defined, such as our economic problems and corruption on Wall Street and these types of things. They're really just not. They're not anything that are taken seriously by broader segments of the population, at least as they actually should be. I could take that back to some degree by saying there was the Occupy Wall Street movement, but even there, you had a number of people involved who failed to actually see the extent to which that movement itself was manipulated by the foundations and so forth. Yeah, I think that it's a very important element of all of this, because we cannot talk about public opinion, the political sophistication and wherewithal of the population, without talking about the failure of our educational system. And that's been a long time coming. But it's something that does have a history. It can be traced. Another author who I think is excellent in this regard is John Taylor Gatto. And he did a 5-hour interview with Richard Grove that is available on YouTube, and it's also available through the Tragedy and Hope website and Corbett Report website and a couple of others, I think Gnostic Media, but they put together a 5-hour DVD set, and it's a wonderful discussion with him. And he lived the educational system itself and chose to walk away from it because he couldn't actually participate in it any longer, but at the same time, took up the importance, I think, mission of examining it and the history of it. And that's something that has, with the exception of Charlotte Iserby and Gatto and a handful of others, has been neglected. And it's something that I think provides it's kind of is the underbelly. It is the fortification of a whole set of myths that are harbored by our professional class, including academics. And with that sort of historical blind spot, I think that we were able to look at our institutions and so forth as if they have more integrity than they actually have.
Do you think, wouldn't you classify that as a cognitive dissonance? If you want, maybe?
Well, I think that there would probably be cognitive dissonance if there were a greater acknowledgement of this sort of history that's been that hasn't been examined to the degree that it actually should be.
Right. Okay.
It's examined by these figures that we've discussed, and yet since they don't have professor, their names are not preceded by that or what have you, then I think that maybe yeah, their work might not be taken in the same sort of way that that it might otherwise be. I'm not certain about that. I think that the work that they've done is very worthwhile, and it's worthy. It's certainly very worthy of our consideration.
I would like to digress with a statement, just briefly, and then touch upon a subject you happen to mention.
Hmm.
I was actually hoping that you would tell me that you are teaching conspiracy of the media, um, teaching how they are manipulating the public, how they are deceiving the public with their use of rhetoric and their forms of manipulation. But I gather that's not what you're teaching. So,
Well, we do have. I don't. There are individuals in our school that do teach rhetoric and do teach propaganda, and so might take a different tack in that regard.
okay, okay,
But I've generally, since much of my training is in history and in criticism to a lesser degree than an institutional analysis. That's more so what I actually look at and consider. Now, those are just a couple of courses that I teach. I did have a course. This was something that was also emphasized in the news stories earlier this year about my remarks on Sandy Hook. I did teach a course called Culture of Conspiracy, and it was a special topics course. And I don't
that's
know
what
if
I
I'll
had
ever
heard.
be,
That's what I had
yeah,
heard.
yeah. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to teach it again. I don't know if it'll make it on the books. After what's taken place, it's something that's kind of bottlenecked right now with a number of other courses. And I'm not sure why exactly that is, but it's been tabled. These courses have to be proposed and then vetted by a couple of committees. And after the controversy, I don't know if it will actually make the if it'll actually be offered. Unfortunately, there's another course that I put together and that I taught in a sort of different way previously in previous years as a media criticism course, and I renamed it Media War and Crisis. And where we were going to look at coverage of wars and also of financial wars and financial terrorism and the like. And that's something that was on the books for the fall of this year, and that was canceled without any real explanation other than they needed for me to teach something else. But it took place about a week after or less after my remarks on Boston. So I don't know if there's any correlation there, but there may very well be some sort of subtle, retribution or what have you. So
Yes.
yeah.
Um, well, the other subject I wanted to go on to that you sort of touched upon. I guess I should preface this a little bit. The appeal to authority argument, the appeal to authority fallacy. I'm I'm of the belief that many broadcasting agencies, the big corporations, actually use this argument nightly and daily in their presentations of news. They will place somebody at a table in front of say a $2 million studio with everything looks flashy, and they're in a nice tidy suit,
Mhm.
and they are presenting the news. So therefore, their information should be taken over authority over, say, like my information, which could be just as valid, if
Mhm.
if if not even more valid. Yet they are in the $2 million studio with the $2,000 suit on, and they are considered the authority.
Yeah, There are a lot of things that are suggested with
It's a
deference.
it's a subliminal suggestion. That's what
Yeah,
I'm getting at. Yes.
yeah. And there are a lot of things that are suggested in terms of deference to authority when their version of reality is something that is taken as being the be all end all, case closed. What does that suggest about the broader population's deference to, established governmental institutions and otherwise? There's no real questioning of these things, right? It's just a given that hey, if they said it, they must know what they're talking about. They must have gotten there by doing something. They must know their stuff. And the same could be said for the variety of experts that are brought on and wheeled before the camera. They must know what they're talking about because they're up there talking in front of the camera and they're being asked questions by the press and they're holding their own. I think that there's a tendency in our culture today, more so than ever, to kind of be a drive-by culture. What the author Larry Beinhart refers to sort of relying on fog facts more so than actually, things that might be researched by an individual independently and verified. And so, if someone or something looks credible, then that's taken at face value, and there's no delving really beyond that image, and that may be the case more so than ever. And it's something that really puts I think puts the power on the side of the court of the major media as well, because they don't have to really worry as much about actually doing investigating. In fact, they could present us with a variety of fantasies, wrapped in a sort of pseudo reality, and we just accept that. Again, that if you look at get back to Sandy Hook, you look at the ridiculous performance of H. Wayne Carver, the medical examiner. If you read the transcription of his remarks, or just watch his exchange with the press, sure, he looks like a doctor and he looks like he knows what he's talking about. Maybe if you look at a snapshot, but if you actually take a moment to look at to interrogate more closely the exchange, you find out he doesn't know what he's talking about, despite the fact that there are a lot of sound bites that are taken out of that exchange and presented as, well, this is what took place. The authority said so. And that's something that is more, I think, salient in my mind, because I reviewed some of the articles that I wrote in preparation for this interview, but there are a lot of other examples that one could point to, to illustrate, I think, the dynamic that you suggest in terms of this reverence toward the authority figure.
Yes, absolutely. And also to expand upon that, I'm old enough to remember there was a time when a news report came out, somebody on the television or somebody on the radio would always use a phrase like, somebody from downtown would say this, or somebody at police headquarters would say this. But now, as you alluded to just a few minutes ago, they are being called authorities or officials to try to imprint the psychological impression that their word shouldn't be questioned.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just something that's changed over the last 20 plus years, 20, 25 years.
Yeah, are being called perhaps public servants or the equivalent.
Yeah. Instead of officials or
it's a common,
like that.
it's a common term that is used on the on the front page and the articles on the paper of record. The New York Times. They're often referring to government officials say, off the
Yes.
record,
Yes.
officials suggest, and yada
Right.
yada yada. And
Authorities. Yes.
yeah, yeah. And of course, the idea that there's a leak or anything of the like is nonsense, because the surveillance, intelligence agencies in our country know exactly what's going on with every telephone call, every Skype call, every email, and there's no way that anyone can hide. Probably even if they're in a parking garage in Washington, D.C., talking to two Washington Post reporters, there'd be microphones somewhere picking up what they say. Not unlike 1984. We live
Yes.
in a tremendously surveilled society. So this notion that this idea that there are leaks and what have you, well, those don't take place with the extent of surveilling power that our government has.
Yes. I would like to touch upon Sandy Hook a little bit and the Boston. Um, I do know one of the attacks on you just after Sandy Hook. They used a straw man on you, and they told you, or they come out with the claim that you believe that nobody died there at Sandy Hook, and you thought it was all a fake. And I believe I caught you on an Alex Jones interview where where you had to explain yourself basically on the Alex Jones show. Um, you you don't have that theory, do you? You actually believe people died there at Sandy Hook, though, don't you? Or
Uh, well, I have more questions now than I actually think that I had at that time.
just since the Alex
Uh,
Jones show?
yeah, that was in late January,
Okay.
and so I think that there was an effort on the behalf of the staff of that program to prevent that discussion of the Sandy Hook event possibly being a drill. Um, but I think that there's sufficient evidence now to suggest that it may have in fact been an elaborate drill. And there are a variety of reasons that I say that, and I think I can say it with a bit more certitude than I could have back then. Well, there were the elements of it being a drill. Just the general way in which it was presented. But looking at it more so, it suggests to me, and this is even more so the case, I think, with Boston, that there were drills that were taking place around Newtown, and that may have been taking place there at the school. So there's certainly a possibility, and I look back at that article that I wrote that was quoted about the crisis actors and what have you, and
Right,
I think
right.
that there are a number of insights in that article that generally hold up. Maybe not everyone, but at the time that was something. The article was somewhat exploratory as well, and speculative. And I think that there was a sentiment at the time that was, well, you're disturbing the families and what have you, and there's a problem with that. And but I think that there are a number of observations that were made in that piece that actually do hold up.
Okay. I'm not going to be critical of you because I have questions myself, and there are too many lies out there. So,
Well, if aside from Carver, who we've discussed, a couple of times, you take some fairly apparent things such as the way in which the emergency response was conducted. Doesn't make any sense.
Or the lack of
Um,
conduction.
the lack of that execution of that.
They weren't
Uh,
allowed in for like 12 hours, were they?
no, no. Well, a number of emergency responders were turned away. They were
Yes,
never
yes.
actually allowed in.
Right.
And emergency responders actually they have to take the deceased to hospital and have them pronounced dead by physicians.
Right.
They can't, it's very unusual that they would do that on site. And yet that's what they claim was done. And then under the cover of night and tremendous secrecy, the bodies were removed from the building. Well, if I were a parent and some sort of, if my child were involved in any sort of event like that, God forbid, I would be a wild man if anything like that took
Yeah.
place. And strangely, over half of the families are silent.
Yes.
There are about 7 families that are out there cheerleading for gun control. Isn't that odd?
Yes.
But the remainder of them are completely silent. I find that extremely unusual. That
And
would
what
be.
gets me is that there haven't been any reports on investigations. Just by investigative reporting, I know that there has to be
Well, there.
hundreds of independent investigative reporters out there in that area.
Yeah.
That's a vastly populated area. I mean, everything. Uh, the I think it's like 70% of the population is east of the Mississippi.
The Mississippi. Well, it's very close to New York City.
Yes.
I mean, and so it's a suburb more or less of New York City. A lot of
Yeah.
people
And
commute.
Boston too. Yeah.
Right, and so you would have you'd have I would think a number of enterprising journalists that would actually want to dig into that story. But outside of alternative independent media such as yourself and other outlets, even there's been very little interest in actually examining this matter, even though it's of tremendous importance, especially I think for the Patriot or what have you, whatever one wishes to call them, liberty media that are concerned about things such as the Second Amendment. This should be paramount on their agenda, and yet there's hardly any discussion.
Do you think there's a lot of fear factor out there? Why that's not being
Well,
taken
if these
place?
media are generally alternative and independent, then there shouldn't be any.
Yeah.
They should be beholden to actually no one. And yet that's it's more or less fallen by the wayside, and I think that we should be even more suspicious now than we were back in January. If you look again at the sort of trajectory of what's taken place in terms of the efforts of the Obama administration to further implement law gun control, you also have the whole agenda of mental health, and this is something that's going to be components of the Affordable Care Act that will go into effect in 2014. Now, today it came out that Obama is not going to make it mandatory for large companies to buy into, to buy health insurance. But outside of that, it goes into effect for everyone else. And of course, your doctor is going to want to know everything about you. Already in Scotland, as you may know, and this is something that it's being tested in Scotland, and it'll go national. But they are ascribing a guardian, a state guardian for every child in Scotland, aside from the parents, and they will assess the welfare of the child. Have you heard about this?
A little bit, yes.
Yeah, it's so this is beginning in Scotland, but this is something that will likely be. This is going to be something broader, where you're going to have someone come
Your
to
own personal big brother.
more or less. Yeah, are you a fit parent?
Yeah.
Are you okay? Are you stable? Yeah.
Just within the last couple of years, over there in the UK, also they put in like 20 to 25,000 CCTV cameras into the homes for the same
Yeah.
for the same purposes.
Right. Yeah. And that's what I'm afraid that's what we are going to see here. We already do to a certain degree, but it's going to be even greater. There's, it depends on how you want to actually, look at these types of events. There are a variety of ways of situating them, of contextualizing them. And if you look at something like Newtown in Boston, there's this whole theme of resilience, right? Of arising from tragedy and disaster and catastrophe and, Sandy Hook, We Choose Love and Boston Strong. These are public relations campaigns that have been developed around these tremendous mediated tragedies. So what does this suggest? What may be in store for us, down the road? There's this ideal, I believe, of an attempt to create this kind of mindset of an individual that can
Subservience.
Yes, well, that, but also withstand adversity and thrive. Yes. Right here, you have this imagery, this very powerful imagery of Boston Marathon, where every people have to be pedantic. I mean, you have to have legs, and all these people have their legs blown off. I mean, think of that powerful imagery. Think of the extremely powerful imagery of 20 children being slaughtered. Not unlike what took place in Dunblane, Scotland, back in March of 1996. Very similar scenario.
Right.
A lot of unexplained circumstances. I find it very curious that very few mainstream or alternative media outlets have actually chosen to compare and contrast these events, whereby Dunblane may have been a template to some degree for Sandy Hook. So I've written about this. Newtown World Order Religion, for example, is on my blog. Talks about the whole the prospect of Agenda 21 is not something we've delved into too much. We're kind of running out of time now, but I see the creation of this sort of kind of this new mindset, the development of this resilience and so on and so forth, experiencing hardship and being able to smile about it as something that may very well be preparing us for this brave new world of Agenda 21, where we will be strongly encouraged to inhabit large metropolitan areas and small little apartments and endure and withstand it, and all these sorts of diseases that come with the various kinds of genetically modified food that we'll probably be forced to consume, and unclean air. So there are all these kinds of things that are actually in certain plans. And how is it that these kinds of events figure into that? Now, maybe there's no relationship at all, but the plans for things such as Agenda 21 are there on the books. It's not anything that can be disputed or argued against or anything. It is right there, and it should concern all of us. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people know nothing about it because it is something that is being implemented in a sort of stealth way. Right, and
the lack of reporting too.
Yeah, exactly. Silence, almost complete silence.
Almost complete silence. Yes.
With regard to Agenda 21, and I like things like geoengineering and the smart meters. All of these things, I think, are in some way, shape, or form. There are relationships that can be assessed, that can be analyzed. The smart meter things. It's not. That's not anything abstract. It's on many people's houses right now. I've gone out there, made it a point to get a meter and measure the things, and they have radiation coming off of them. There's no disputing that. And what's the broader plan here? I think it's much more so than just us being able to gauge how much energy we use. It has to do with creating an international grid to control our energy consumption, but more so to, I think, control, determine our lifestyle and the extent of our standard of living. That's really the broader sort of scheme.
Yes, absolutely. I actually have a question from the chat room. Somebody, um, somebody is actually in the middle of reading Sister Miriam's book. Uh, Yet, he thinks because of the non-education, he doesn't understand the litany of the cryptic vocabulary, and thus neither the book. Um, are you aware of any more kind of dumbed-down literature that might be out there comparatively to Sister Miriam's book?
Is he talking about the Trivium, the book on the Trivium?
Possibly. He didn't specify.
This is the Catholic nun, I believe, who wrote the book. This goes back to the 1930s. I believe it's a handbook for teaching the Trivium, and it's
Okay.
something that it's something I've not actually been able to delve into, but as far as actually having a how-to book, there are a variety of resources out there for homeschooling. I mean, it's more than a cottage industry anymore. There's something specific. I've looked more so at the history of this, and less so actually at the method. Um, and right off the top of my head, I guess I probably can't think of anything
He was
specific.
referring to the Trivium, yes.
Yeah, yeah. And that particular book. I know, I've not delved into it to the extent that I probably should. When I did find it somewhat turgid as well, and difficult to kind of get through. But again, I think that book is about 75 or 80 years old. It's still something that I think is in print, which points to its fact that it does stand the test of time. But I wish that I could be better help in that regard.
Yes, that's okay. I think you addressed his situation, but
Yeah, but I
I
know that
had
I think it's called Rainbow Resources. There's a book that's like the size of the Manhattan
encyclopedia.
telephone book. Yeah, that I mean it's probably about 3.5 inches thick. We've got it at home because my wife and I, we do homeschool. We began doing that this year, and
Very good, very
it
good.
yeah it's quite rewarding, in fact. And there's again there are a great many resources, and I think it's also probably important to, depending on where you are, uh, finding a community and trying to do a bit of networking as far as who else might be homeschooling in your area. There might be groups, and talking with someone, and someone that you see eye to eye with, and kind of getting ideas on what they're using in their curriculum might be helpful.
Okay. Just to correct myself, he said he's on his fourth reading of that book, so
Oh, okay.
there's a little clarification there. Um, I did I did remiss in telling you earlier, one of my two streams, if you did get my email, and the message I sent through Skype is MSI Radio, Media Streaming International Radio, and they are out of Ireland. Um, and you're broadcasting mainly in Ireland, Scotland, and the UK, and probably parts of Australia are listening to you. So you've had some key words there in the last 2 hours that piqued our interest.
Well, good. I hope that some of it's been
Yes,
useful and at least a bit enlightening.
yes, and at MSI here, Media Streaming International, we are all about solutions. So can you maybe break down what a solution can be as far as combating the dinosaur mainstream media?
Well, I think the awareness. I think looking at a variety of alternative media outlets generally, even mainstream, because a lot of news does come out in mainstream outlets. And the problem is with mainstream outlets, it's not contextualized to the extent that it actually should be or could be. And I think that's what some, commentators, alternative commentators, or otherwise are actually useful and helpful in presenting things. You could say the same thing, about documentary filmmaking as well. They actually take all this seemingly disparate reportage and actually make it meaningful by setting it alongside each other. And so that's one thing. Just having a decent regimen of what is taken in and how one actually surveys what's going on. That's a start. But also, I think communicating with individuals in your community as well, and having a conversation. If your circumstances allow for that, if they don't, maybe you can create circumstances where they might. Because
that's what I have worked.
Yeah, what's that?
I'm working on that. I'm working on local.
Well,
I'm
we
working
all
on
have
local
to.
events. Yep.
I have to as well, because the way that our system is that it generally sequesters us from each other, and where we actually sit in front of a computer screen or in front of the television when we could be out, talking with our neighbors or being involved in community affairs and things. And that's tremendously unfortunate. At the same time, in defense of working people, many of us work more hours than we ever have in the past, and might not have the time to go out and engage like that. And just about the only energy you have left is to sit on the couch and take in the news, But
Taking
that's
the
another
propaganda.
thing. Yeah. Unfortunately, and but that's something that I do mention to my students is you have to have a variety of media and take that in order to kind of understand what's going on. When we had a couple of hurricanes here in the early 2000s, we lost power here in South Florida, and people actually discovered or rediscovered, in some cases discovered, their front porches. They discovered their neighbors, discovered board games and conversing. And people didn't have power, but in some ways we were better off, and it might not have lasted any more
They
than a week or
discovered
so.
the 19th century, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, and I think that's definitely in part, I think, why people probably were more mentally capable, adept, and swift than they are today.
Sure.
Is that they actually they had that opportunity to engage. I know that I get, when I'm not able to teach and converse and communicate and things like that, I'm usually in a a more somber or sour mood than I otherwise would be. So it's something that actually is, right down to our physiology and our mental emotional states. I think that being in communication is very important, and that's part of it, and deliberating. So those are the kinds of suggestions that I would have as far as building, helping to build a better world and overcome some of the things and problems and obstacles that we presently face that might seem insurmountable.
Absolutely great. Well, I would like to thank you. Thank you once again for coming on and giving us a lot of great information. And if you would like to take a minute or two, or however long it would take to plug your sites or plug whatever you would like.
Sure. The main site is memoryholeblog.com, and I write a piece every week or 10 days when I'm able to. Lately, I've been addressing the Sandy Hook in Boston, but there are other types of media and political criticism up there, and there's a small number of contributors as well that I do post some of their material. But I am fairly discreet in what I do put up there. It's not really a a news or alternative news site per se. It's more so commentary, and I try not to inundate subscribers with a whole lot of stuff that might not be useful. And I'm respectful of that. But if there are things that I don't think have gotten the exposure they deserve, then those things do go up there. So that's memoryholeblog.com. I also have a couple of essays coming out in the forthcoming yearbook by Project Censored, Censored 2014, and that will be due out in October of 2014. There's a link to a couple of links to Project Censored's sites on my blog at Memory Hole Blog.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I know I would like to invite you back on again, and I think maybe even one more broadcaster has expressed interest in you. So either I may be contacting you or somebody else might, if that would be okay for another show.
Oh, please feel free to. You have my contact information. I'd be more than happy to help out, to appear. And, I've got some time this summer, so I'll be a little bit more busy when the end of August rolls around, but certainly be able to come back on, and I'd look forward to it.
All right. Thank you once again, Professor Tracy, and have a good night.
Okay, you too, Stephen. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, everybody. I'm going to end my video part of the show here, so I'm going to sign off on the video broadcast of Cancel the Cabal. And more than likely, I'm going to have to check out and see if I can be able to do anything else on the radio stream. If I cannot, I will just sign off on it too. So this is Steve Roberts, and I'm ending the video Cancel the Cabal. Good night.
Time to Cancel the Cabal with Stephen Roberts on MSI Radio.
truthbroadcastnetwork.com. truthbroadcastnetwork.com.
This is media. Streaming. International Radio. This is media. Streaming. International Radio.